Okay, you might hear hear the sound of football in the background. Um, Perhaps you don't, but I want to get back to something that is central to Christian teaching, and perhaps it's not just Orthodox Christians or Orthodox Muslims. Perhaps it could be generally or as a wider concern, and that is the ability of man to become perfect on earth, or to become quote unquote morally perfect. Christianity says that's impossible because no one can follow every one of the laws or every one of the standards in the Bible, whether it be the old covenant or the new covenant. So Paul said no one can become righteous, and everyone will fall from the short glory of the Lord because they can't meet God's standards. If that is the case, does free will exist? Is that predicated on free will? Is falling from God's standards predicated on free will? If the answer is yes, then it must be possible to become perfect for somebody to follow every one of God's laws. Because free will means the power to become either good or evil, the power to become perfectly good or perfectly evil. Now, if the answer is no, did God create a nature, or did God create a reproductive system where imperfection or flaws in human beings is transmitted? If that is the case, is God responsible? Now, the apologist may say, well, the first human beings, Adam and Eve, or just the first human beings, whether you believe the Adam and Eve story is true literally or not, the first human beings falling from God's will created their own nature, so therefore you should blame the first human beings. They are the ones who bear the weight. However, my question is, every human being, before a human being is born, he doesn't have any sin. So, based on the sin of somebody else, or the sin and imperfection of the first human beings, this is being transmitted. And God is creating a reproductive system, or has allowed a reproductive system to pass this quote unquote spiritual gene of sin. Thus, based on the actions of the first human beings, the very first human beings, or the very first human being, I should say, the very first human being, and God creating a reproductive system to transmit the flaw, the ability to sin. This is the causal agent of human sin, not just free will. In conclusion, it is absolutely impossible for one to be sinless, even if they exercise their free will perfectly, because of the sins of the first two, a man and a woman. Now, again, it doesn't matter if Adam and Eve, just like I agree with the Catholics, the Christian theme does not, well, the Christian theme is debatable, obviously, because the Jewish theme is completely different than the Christian theme. So original sin is not in Judaism. However, if we grant the Christian theme of Adam to Eve and original sin to be true, it doesn't matter whether Adam and Eve, there was somebody named Adam and Eve in the story. As a matter of fact, every single one of those things could be metaphors. The fact of the matter is that someone can take that metaphorical allegory within a Christian context and assume that original sin started with the first human being. Their mistakes, their flaw, their disobedience to God was transmitted to their offspring. And now the apologists may say, well, it's Adam and Eve transmitted it because they sinned. Well, fundamentally no, because they are not responsible for the consequences of the reproductive system. I mean, the process, the fundamental process. Because, to be honest, two people can have sex and they don't reproduce. That is God. You have to, if you're taking a biblical worldview, God is the reason. Okay, so therefore, the reproductive, God must be partly responsible if you're looking at it from objective eyes. If you're looking at it from objective eyes and granting all these claims to be true, and if you're reading this not necessarily as something that's true, it doesn't matter if it's true. If you're reading this as a hypothetical situation or as a story, you must conclude God is partly responsible. It doesn't change whether I believe in your God or not. The intentions of the authors within your own theological worldview. If God's partly responsible, and you can't be, and God is partly responsible for you not being perfect, then what is discussion of free will? Free will is meaningless to an extent, isn't it? What does free will mean? God doesn't want you to become perfect. It's only if in a Christian lens of somebody that fears God or will fear God, if they change their mind, is not going to see this. Now, I mean, fear means that they will become from saved to unsaved. So they must trust that it is their fault, even with the reasons that I'm giving, and will come up with counter arguments to justify their worldview. But the fact of the matter is, human beings are not responsible for the processes in the reproductive system. They're not responsible for sperm uniting with egg, dividing, and that whole process. Now, the act of sex does cause this to an extent, but the act of sex in of itself does not necessarily need the process. The process has to be in place. You can actually not have sex and still create this process. Okay, the process is not done by human beings. So, if human beings cannot become, the bottom line is if human beings cannot become perfect or sinless, then they don't have free will in the absolute sense. They don't have free will in the essential sense. If they fall short of God, and God is partly the causal agent by using a reproductive system which transmits the sins of our our genetic ancestors, then there is no free will. The free will that is discussed is meaningless to us, even in the theology. Now, I want to end this. Now, I'm sure that many of you Christian apologists that believe in your explanations and when you're explaining these things to us, that atheists are just trying, or agnostics or non-Christians are just trying to find ways to resist. There's nothing to resist. There's nothing to resist. I'm not trying to resist the doctrine. I'm trying to tell you why people don't believe in your doctrine. That the trust that you say that's unconditional, that you call it virtue, in believing in this and saying that it's beyond our comprehension, we say is in our comprehension, and it clearly negates your fact, negates your claim. That's all I have to say about this.